These pumpkin crafts are definitely going to spice up your fall decor. Hey, it's Donna here. I'm happy to have you crafting with me today. Let's get started. I have some lace doilies that I picked up from the thrift store, along with some crochet thread, some little stumps that I picked up, or branches that I picked up from the bush or from the craft store. I got these ones from Dollar Tree. You'll need some stones, anything that you have on hand. I've seen some people use rice as well, a wire, and this is coated with some brown florist wire, or you can get some pre-wrapped wire as well. I'll be using a tapestry needle for this project, and the reason is because it's got a nice large hole for the thread and it's got a really sturdy nub on the end. I also am going to use this scrap material that I had in my stash. This is perfect to use up some scrap fabric, some filling, and some leaves in my stash as well. I'll need a glue stick and some scissors. And then what I'm going to do is actually cut out some of my fabric here in some circles that'll be about the shape of my doily. Sorry, I mean the size of my doily. I'm going to be using this one because I like the edge on it. Of course, just use whatever you have in your stash. I'll be making a few just to show you different styles. So I'm just going to lay my doily onto my fabric just to give me a rough idea about the size that I need to cut it out. So I find the easiest way is actually just to fold my fabric into a quarter, and then that quarter, fold that in half on an angle so you've got like a triangle. And now I'm just going to use my scissors to trim off the one end, and that will create more of a round shape. Now it's not going to be perfect, as you'll see here in a moment, but it definitely gives you a base to start with, and then you can continue to trim it down as needed. So as I said before, I am using some crochet thread, but you could use some embroidery thread. That would work as well. You need some really nice sharp scissors. These are my fabric scissors, and that works really well to cut your string and your fabric. So I am going to be tying a knot on one end of my string, and then I'm just going to do a basic running stitch all the way around the edge of my fabric. And then the knot will, of course, prevent it from coming right through. Once you get back to the end, you're going to pull your strings, and I'm pulling both of them, and you can see how it's all gathering up. Now I'm not going to close it up tight at this point because I need to be able to get some of my rocks in there, my little stones, as well as my filling. So now I'm just going to go ahead and add some of the rocks on the bottom, and the reason for this is so that my pumpkin will stay nice and stable on the counter and will sit nicely. Also going to add my filling now. You can use old pillows if you'd like. I am just going to go ahead now and then pull those two strings tight, really tight, enough so I can fit my stem in there still. But you can see all the pretty little gathers that this has. And now I'm just going to tie those two ends together to create a knot just to help it hold together. So now I'm going to add my stem. So you could just make your pumpkin just as is. This would be such a cute little pumpkin, especially if you're really into that old country farmhouse look. You can see I'm using a branch that I foraged and it fits there nicely, but you can get these little stems at Dollar Tree, as I had mentioned before, or other stores. Now I'm going to add some glue in the center, and then I'm going to place my stem inside there. And then I am going to try and do most of my work on the pumpkin with the hot glue. I like to try and not get hot glue on my doilies. That way here I can take these apart and reuse the doilies for another project if I'd like. So that's exactly what I'm going to do with this one. So I place my pumpkin in the middle of the doily that I've chosen. I'm going to gather up my little edges here of my doily around the stem. You can see how cute that's going to look with all that textured edge there. And then once you've got it all gathered up, you're going to take your string and just wrap it around a few times, and then you want to pull it tight. Once you have it tight enough, you can then just tie it off with a basic knot. I'm also going to just kind of fluff up the edges a bit too, just to make sure that it is sitting properly so it's not all just to one side. And then now, if you'd like, you can add some tendrils or some leaves. You can see here that I've got these wires. Again, I covered these with some brown florist tape. I'm wrapping the wire around a pencil, and that will create some tendrils. And then just adding a little bit of hot glue, I'm going to put it just on one edge, and then that edge is going to go against the stem. Again, I didn't want any hot glue on my doily. And that's it. This is such a cute little pumpkin. So for this pumpkin, I wanted to try something a little different. I already cut my fabric out, and you can see that it's the exact size of my doily. So what I wanted to try to do is attach my fabric to the doily, so then it's one piece and I can create a pouch out of the two pieces here. So again, same thing as before, I'm doing a running stitch all the way around the edge. You can see that it's quite thick. That is the reason why I wanted to use a tapestry needle. It works really well. So again, just went all the way around the edge. And then once I get to the end, again, I'm going to be pulling the two strands together because I need to be able to create my pouch and have the two ends to tie together once I've got my pouch created. I want enough space here so I can add my rocks and my filling as well. You can see how it looks there. And now I'm just going to go ahead and add my rocks and then my filling. And then just as before, pulling my strings tight, enough room so I can fit my stem. And I'm going to tie those two ends off. And then I can go ahead and finish decorating this little pumpkin. Just going to find a stem that'll fit. And I decided that I am actually going to use the pre-covered wire here. I got this stuff from Dollarama, but I have seen some jute twine covered wire at Dollar Tree. If you can't get your hands on something like this, that would definitely work. Or you could use the florist tape wrapped florist wire as well. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, so now I'm going to just go ahead and add my little tendrils, and then if you like, this would actually be really great to add some leaves. So I'm going to just use some scraps of leaves that I have left over from some projects. And I just added a tiny bit of some hot glue with that one. Here you can see I already have a larger one already made, ready to go. Turned out so cute. And this is what they all look like on display. I think they are absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to be using this styrofoam pumpkin that I had picked up from Dollar Tree, and I had started to use it for another project, but I never finished that, so I thought I would use it for this project. I'm giving the entire pumpkin a coat of some white gesso. Now, gesso is a primer, and this is something I use regularly when I need to cover up something bright like this or need to coat a surface to allow for something such as paint or some glue to adhere to. And this gesso is perfect for that. You can use whatever you'd like to apply some type of primer or paint to seal up your pumpkin. So here it is, all nice and dry. Now I am going to be cutting up some scraps of some coffee dyed fabrics that I had. I had strips of this and some pieces of this from other projects, and so I've been wanting to use this up as well. I'm just going to cut it down into some more usable sizes, and again I'm tearing them so that they have nice frayed edges. Of course, use any colors that you like. You don't even have to use coffee dyed fabric, but I just really like the look that it has. It has a really nice rustic country farmhouse look. Once you have a decent pile of fabric all cut up, I'm going to be using some matte decoupage and some water. It's 2 parts glue to 1 part water, and I'm going to give that a stir. The reason for that is because the fabric will absorb quite a bit of this, and it just helps the glue to go a long ways without creating a super thick layer of the glue. So I'm just going to start to apply some glue directly to the pumpkin, and then I'm going to press my fabric into place, just like you see me doing here. I actually kind of wish I would have started from the bottom and then worked my way up, but I do end up just making some adjustments as I go along till I get a look that I'm really happy with. So you just want to make sure that you get the fabric fully saturated with your water and glue mixture. And then that way here, you know that it is going to stick really well to the surface of your pumpkin. Another option would be to decoupage with some napkins or some beautiful papers. Just use your imagination with this. You can even paint on this if you'd like, but I really like the look of the fabric for this project, so this is what I chose to do. So I'm going to go ahead and just work on this in sections until I get my pumpkin all covered up to a look that I like. Again, you do want to work on a protective surface because this does get very messy. Another tip too is that you'll want to allow the top part to partially dry before you move on to the bottom. Again, that just helps with the messiness, because I'm telling you, as I was working with this, oh my word, I had so much glue everywhere. So I did find it helpful to allow the top to be partially dried before I moved on to the bottom. So another thing I did as well, I went in with some smaller pieces just to cover up some of those smaller gaps that I had showing. And also I found that it helped to break up any of the larger pattern pieces that I had showing that I wasn't too crazy about. So I did go in off camera and I added some smaller pieces just scattered here and there till I got a look that I was really happy with. Here's my pumpkin all nice and dry, and you can see those added little pieces that I had. For a decorative touch, I am adding some Spanish moss and this dried pumpkin stem that I had saved from last year. So using the Spanish moss just creates, again, that rustic country look. This is something that I learned from Country Charm by Tracy, and this is something that she does quite often, and I really like the look of that. So you could use whatever you like. You can add some ribbons or some leaves. I'm just using some hot glue to adhere the Spanish moss as well as the stem, and I'm allowing it to set, and then it's ready to put on display. And I'm loving how this pumpkin looks. I got this wood blank in the shape of a pumpkin from a store called Dollarama here in Canada. You can get these at other craft stores as well. You just want to make sure it's nice and flat. I'm going to be removing the string on this. So other tools you'll need is a metal ruler, an embossing tool or a bone folder, a pencil. I'm going to be using the steel ruler here and my pencil. And what I'm going to do is actually create groove lines in the wood. So the wood is kind of on the softer side, so I am pressing hard, but not so hard that you're going to break your pencil, of course. So now I'm going to go ahead and try it out with my embossing tool. So I did find the embossing tool worked the best. You could get a really nice deep mark, as you saw me there, but I wanted to just give you several options so then you can see what they all look like. I'm also going to be trying my bone folder here. Same thing, just running it along the ruler and leaving an indent. So that's what they all look like. I really like the pencil because then you can see that mark. So I'm just going to go over all my lines again, and then I'm going to continue to go across the pumpkin, and you can see what it's doing is creating kind of some wood slats to create a bit of a shiplap look. Say that 10 times fast. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this up. I decided to go over these with the embossing tool really hard because I wanted those grooves to be quite deep. And yes, the pencil mark did leave a bit of a groove, but like I said, I didn't press too hard because I didn't want to break my pencil lead. So now I'm going to be going over the entire piece with some burnt umber acrylic paint. And then I'm going to just let that dry. So just so you know, this video is a compilation of some previous pumpkin projects that I have created here on my channel. So this one here is an older one, but I really love the technique of creating the shiplap. So I really wanted to share this one with you. I have a playlist with all the original videos for you listed in a playlist in the description box, as well as pinned at the top of the comment feed. So you can check those out. So I'm just going to go ahead and just continue to paint this until I've got it fully covered and then let that dry. You could see that when I was doing my brush strokes, I kind of created it in the shape of the pumpkin as well. It's all nice and dry here. I've got some off-white, or it's kind of like a warm white craft paint, and then I'm going to just go ahead and brush that on. And before the paint dries, I'm going to take my embossing tool and a rag, and I'm going to run the tool over the grooves. So you'll see the dark brown paint underneath. So you want to make sure that you do this before that craft paint dries. If your grooves are deep enough, you should be able to see them through the paint. You can kind of see here. If you find that they are still not deep enough, then go ahead and use your embossing tool and go over those lines again, because maybe your paint got a little too thick in those spots and it pooled up a bit and it hid those lines. So I'm just going to go ahead and go over them again because some of them did fill up with a bit too much paint. So now you can really see those groove marks. Now I'm going to go ahead and just continue to use my warm white craft paint and the tool to remove the excess paint in those grooves. And then you'll see that kind of shiplap look. I'm going to allow that to dry well, and then I'm going to go ahead and give it a second coat if needed. I did find that it just lacked that kind of pumpkin shape. So as you could see, I was taking my brush and I was doing it kind of in a curvature motion that would go with the shape of the pumpkin. And then that would just help to define that shape a little bit better. Once that second coat is dry, I decided to distress this piece. I'm going to go ahead and focus on the edges. You can see that the brown paint is then coming through. And then if you want, you can go ahead and distress over the entire surface just to lift some of the warm white paint, just so the color from underneath shows through a little bit better. You can see here I left the stem unpainted. That's because I wanted to use burlap to cover my stem. So I flipped it upside down, I've got my pen, and I'm just going to trace around the stem, and then I'm going to cut out my piece here. But on the bottom, you're going to see that I create a bit of a different texture just to create some interest on the bottom edge. So once I've got the top part of my stem cut out, I cut the fabric out and then left enough so I can create this pattern here, and then I'm going to just cut that out as well, and you'll see how cool that looks. It just creates a really neat, kind of like a country farmhouse look here. So I just used some hot glue and put that into place. I did cover up the hole, so I am going to have to poke that through, but I'm doing a little bit more hot glue here and there just to make sure that the burlap stays down. I am going to just use my scissors here and poke a hole through, and that way here again I can put my string through there. So I wanted to create some interest around the stem, so I decided to wrap the top a bit with some jute twine a few times, and you'll see I'm trying to angle it a bit. That just helps to create, again, like I said, some interest to this. So you could finish this off with a basic knot, but I decided to tie just a simple little bow, and I'm going to glue that just to help secure it into place. And I left the strings a little longer. I'm adding a silk or a faux leaf here. I just really like the way that look, and I love the color of this. And again, just using some hot glue. Now I need to go ahead and create my hanger for my pumpkin here as well. So I took some jute twine and then I folded that in half, and then I'm going to take my scissors and poke that jute twine through the hole, and then I'm just going to go ahead and pull those strings through, and that was it. I love the way this piece turned out. I wanted to create some primitive farmhouse style mini pumpkins, so I am just using some plates and I'm tracing it over top of this excess fabric. It's the green ticking fabric. The green ticking fabric was placed upside down, and I did a total of 3 circles, and I did a couple of different sizes. You won't see the pencil line once you're finished, as that's going to be on the inside of our pumpkin. So once you've got your templates all traced out, you can then take your scissors and cut your circles out. So here they are, all ready to go. I wanted to create that really grungy primitive look. I just love that look, and I knew the best way to do that was to coffee dye my fabric. Now you can skip this step if you don't like that look, that's completely fine, but I love it, so I thought I'd just give it a whirl and see how well this fabric takes to the dye. So I just used some instant coffee that I picked up from Dollar Tree, mixed it with some boiling water. It was about 2 tablespoons or so with about 1 cup of water. So now I'm just going to soak my fabric rounds in the coffee solution. And then as you can see, I've got a cookie sheet here, and I'm going to be laying those pieces out flat onto the cookie sheet. All right, so my fabrics are all ready to go. I like to dry them in the oven, but you can let them air dry. In the oven, they create a really interesting texture, as you can see. I think it gives it a really grungy look. The one didn't have enough staining on one side, so I added some more coffee, put it back in the oven, and you can see the texture that it created right here. You can see how unique each of these fabric rounds is. I just love that. I think it's so cool. So they did get rather stiff, so I just like to crumple them up in my hands. That way it makes it so it's a lot more pliable and easier to use. Of course, if you didn't dye your fabric, you won't have to do this step. Okay, so for this next step, you're gonna need some crochet thread as well as a tapestry needle. Mine's blunt on one end and the hole is big enough that I can thread this string through the eye. You'll just want to trim off a long strand and then of course put it onto your needle. And then I always like to tie a knot on one end that will prevent the thread from pulling through your fabric. So I'm going to be doing a running stitch. It's a very basic stitch here. I'm going to go all the way around the edge of our fabric. So I always like to start my stitching on the inside, and I always like to finish it off on the inside. That way here, when you do go to tie it up, the knot will be on the inside of the pouch. So once you reach all the way around, you can just kind of straighten everything up a bit, but you want to leave your pouch open. Now this is something I like to do. I like to add a few pebbles to the bottom. You could use something else if you prefer, but this is what I like to use. That just provides just a little bit of weight so it sits nicely on the surface that you choose. Gonna want to fill it up with some fiberfill. I'm just using some pillows that I have picked up from Walmart. They're $4 or $5. It's a cheap way of getting some fiberfill. You want to fill that up and then pull your strings tight. So you want to make sure the hole is left open just slightly, and then you want to tie that off. I always like to do a triple knot. All right, so now it's time to start decorating our little pumpkin. I have these branches that I had picked up from the dollar store. You can pick them from the forest as well. Just some random leaves that I had in my stash, and I'm gonna be using some Spanish moss. I got this idea from Country Charm by Tracy here on YouTube. Thank you for this idea, Tracy. I love the look. It's perfect for that primitive country look that I like. So I just want to make sure that my stem is going to fit in the hole of my pumpkin, and then I'm going to add some glue and press the stem down into place in the middle of this little poof. Next, I'm going to add my leaves. Now I have two sizes here, and these are actually left over from faux florals that I had in my stash. I keep stuff like this because I use them a lot for projects like this. It's just a great way to repurpose these little leaves. So I just trim them down, and then I'm going to glue them into place. And as you can see, I'm using two different sizes just for some interest to the piece. All right, so now I'm going to add that Spanish moss that Tracy uses in her projects. So I'm just adding some glue at the base of the stem, and I'm going to wrap the Spanish moss around it. I figured this would be a great alternative to tendrils that you would find on pumpkins. I think it looks really, really neat. Just want to trim down the excess, and then I decided to add just a few pieces of the Spanish moss underneath the leaves. But of course, this is optional. You could even add some florals, pine cones, whatever you like to decorate your pumpkins. These beautiful fabric pumpkins that we created, as well as these primitive candles that I had made a while back. I'll have the link for you down in the description and pinned in the comments. So I have my fabrics layered on the table already. And now I'm going to be using this wood platform that I had bought recently. I'm going to just start to layer my pieces in. I've got amber glass that are filled with grasses and branches and all the different candles that we had decorated. And then I am also going to just tuck the fabric pumpkins in here and there as well. So I know not everybody's going to have a wood platform like this, so I'm going to be sharing another option on how you can decorate your table as well. So I just felt like something was missing, so that is why I decided to use these burlap leaves. I just felt like all these pieces needed a base to sit on besides just the wood platform that I have here. So I'm just picking the items up, as you can see, and I'm just tucking them in underneath. Of course, you can use anything that you have. Everything that came together here is fairly simple and so rustic and primitive looking, and definitely has that fall vibe that I was going for. So for this second look, I laid out some silk leaf garland and some faux battery operated candles. And now I'm just going to tuck these little pumpkins in here and there, along with these beautiful primitive candles that I had created. There's some amber glass and some branches and grasses all tucked in. This was a really simple creation and I absolutely love how it turned out. I can't wait to make a new fall decor table centerpiece. I absolutely love creating these. They create such a warm, cozy, and inviting look. Let me know what you think. I have this really nice wood frame with the glass insert still in it. I am going to be removing the backing from this, but I am going to be using the glass that's inside. But I didn't quite like the color of the frame, so I'm going to go ahead and give it some heirloom white satin spray paint, and I did that outside. I'm going to let it dry. While that is drying, I'm going to go ahead and use some paper and a pencil, and I'm going to sketch out a basic pumpkin shape. Now I am just lightly sketching it here. This is just going to give me an idea of what I want my pumpkin shape to look like. I'm going to be placing that underneath my glass. That is going to be the outline that I'm going to be using to paint my pumpkin. I'm going to use this Naples yellow paint here and some neutral gray, some unbleached titanium, and some raw umber. And these are all the Liquitex basic acrylic paints. So I'm going to be going ahead and painting right onto my glass. So I've got a round tip brush and I'm going to go over my lines. And I'm starting off with my dark colors first. So I'm just going to go ahead and just, again, going over those lines. These are the grooves of the pumpkin. You want to start off with this darker shade because that will create the shadowing effect that you need to create the definition of those grooves on your pumpkin. So once you've got that in place, I'm going to use a flat brush. Don't ask me the size. I'm not a professional painter here, but now I'm going to go over the blank part with the Naples yellow. I'm going to fill that in. And if you get some over the groove marks, that's okay because you can see that those groove marks are still showing through. I'm going to go ahead and use the raw umber to fill in the stem. And then I'm just going to continue to just work my paints back and forth, blending and adding some highlights and then some for the top and adding some dark color for the bottom for the shadow until you get a look that you really like. This is just playing around. Like I said, I'm not a professional here, but I have watched enough painting tutorials that I was able to figure this out and create just a really beautiful look. Added some paint for the tendrils as well. And now here's my frame. It's all nice and dry. I'm going to take a sanding block and I am going to just distress the edges. The color of the frame from underneath will show through, but if you wanted, you could definitely add some dark paint here and there just to create that grungy look. So my pumpkin is all nice and dry. It turned out really, really well. So now all I have to do is flip my frame upside down and then put my glass into place. If you wanted, you could add some paper to the backdrop of this and create a really beautiful fall scene. I love just the clear glass. I think it created a very unique piece. Let me know what you think and if you are going to try this out. I would love to know. I think it's just such a fun piece. I'm going to show you how to make some boho-inspired velvet pumpkins. I'm starting off with this vintage green velvet, and I'm using a plate to cut out my template. I'm using a black marker to trace around the plate, and then I'm going to use some sharp fabric scissors to cut my circle out. Now I have some embroidery floss and it matches my fabric along with a needle. I am going to thread my needle with the embroidery floss, then tie a knot on the one end just so that it doesn't pull through. So now you're going to just stitch along the edge of your circle, and you're just going to be doing a simple running stitch all the way around. Once you're done stitching all the way around, you'll remove the needle, and then you're going to pull your two ends slightly to form a pouch. This part is optional. I like to add some pebbles to the bottom of my fabric pumpkins. That just helps the pumpkins to sit nicely on your surface. Now it's time to fill our pumpkins. I like to use some fiberfill, and I get my fiberfill from using pillows that I buy at Walmart. Once you have your pumpkin all stuffed, you're going to pull your strings tight, then tie it off with a knot. I'm going to be using a piece of branch that I found outside, and you're going to glue this into place into the center of the pumpkin. Okay, so this part is optional. I have these gorgeous velvet leaves in my stash, and I'm just going to trim them off and hot glue them into place. Another option is to add some tendrils. I am using some florist wire and florist tape, and I am going to double wrap my wire. You're going to then cut the wire down to your desired size and then wrap it around a pen or a pencil to form a coil. Glue this into place around your stem and bend as desired. So for my next velvet pumpkin, I am going big. This is a big circle. I am doing all the same procedures to create this large pumpkin. And this fabric is a lot thicker, so I am going to be making a bigger knot on the end of my thread. And that way here, it won't pull right through my fabric. As you can see, as I'm stitching the edge, I am pulling together the gathers of this fabric. And then once you get to the end, just make sure you leave enough of a space for you to put your pebbles into the base as well as the fiberfill. I am adding quite a bit of fiber fill to this pumpkin. I want this to be a really nice plush looking pumpkin. Again, once you are done filling it up, pull your strings tight. Now, because this fabric is thicker, it's not going to close up as tight as my previous one, but that's okay. I am going to be filling in that center with my stem as I will be showing. Okay, so now I am going to use something very different as the stem. I found this cylinder of birch bark out in the forest. I love to add a touch of nature to my decor and DIYs, so if that interests you, I'd love for you to check out my channel. Again, I am going to be adding these beautiful velvet leaves I had in my stash. This part is optional. Again, I am going to add my wire as the tendrils in around the stem. I absolutely love how these pumpkins turned out. I will have a playlist for you of all my other fall DIYs that I've created, along with that doily pumpkin tutorial. I'm going to be using this wood pumpkin, and I've got mine from Dollarama. You can pick them up at Dollar Tree as well. And you'll also need an old sweater. You can use any kind of sweater you like. I really like this one because of the colors and the pattern. You'll want to flip the sweater upside down and then figure out which way you want to use your panel. Now, as you can see, I had done some experimenting on this pumpkin panel already, and I wanted to cover that up. So I'm placing the two wrong sides together, and then using a Sharpie, I am going to outline around my pumpkin, and then that will give me a guide as to what I need to cut out. So I'm using my good fabric scissors and I'm cutting around my outline, and as you can see there, I am cutting out about a centimeter away from my outline that I drew. That would give me a little bit of wiggle room if I make a mistake or anything. Save that sweater for some other projects. I'm going to place my sweater over top of the pumpkin panel that I wanted to cover up, and then I'm going to attach this using some hot glue. Now you could use some wet glue. Tacky glue would actually work really well, but I just wanted to be quick about this, so I'm using my hot glue. So I'm just going around the edge and then I'm patting down my sweater into the glue. I'm just going to reach inside here with my glue gun and attach a little bit of hot glue, and that'll prevent the sweater from slipping, and then continue to glue down my edges. Once the sweater is glued into place, you can then trim off the excess. Now I should have done this step before I put the sweater on, but I just wasn't thinking about this. So I am applying some gel walnut stain put out by Decor, and I'm applying it to the stem and the edges of my pumpkin wood panel. And it would have been easier if I did that before I applied the sweater, but yeah, sometimes we make those mistakes. So I'm using a makeup sponge to apply the paint or the stain to the edge of our pumpkin and allow it to dry. So I noticed that some of my edges were lifting, so I'm just going to go in with my glue gun and just pat those down just to make sure they stay in place and my sweater doesn't fray. So you could leave the pumpkin stem as is, but I love to add a touch of nature, and I decided to cover up my stem with some birch bark. I'm just going to trim it down, and then using some hot glue, I am going to attach my birch bark pieces to the stem. You will want to press and hold the birch bark till the glue sets. Once the glue has set, you can now trim off that birch bark. I'm going to be using my wire cutters, but of course use some shears or whatever you have that's in your stash that can cut through the bark. Once you have that all trimmed up, you can now flip it over and we are going to make our little hanger. I've just got a piece of jute twine here. I'm going to create a knot after I folded the string in half. And then I don't want to go through the birch bark. So what I'm going to do is add glue into the hole and then take my scissors and poke that knot into the hole where the glue is and add some more glue over top. That will help to secure it all in place. Allow that to set up before you start to handle that string though, but it works really well. I wanted to add some decorative elements now to the top around the stem. I just created a loopy bow and added some extra string just to create kind of a tendril look. I'm just using some wire to create that bow and then just trim it off as needed. It's just a really nice simple bow here. I also have some faux leaves from my stash. I thought that would be a nice touch. I'm going to just glue those into place. And then you can use anything that you'd like, of course. I have these leaves left over from a previous project. Now I'm going to just add that bow, and then I'm going to add some pine cones too. Some faux paper flowers would be pretty. I have some tendrils that I had cut off from, I think it was like a grapevine, and I thought they actually would look really, really cool added into this little decorative piece here. Really like that look. It turns out so cute. It is perfect cozy look for the fall season. For our next DIY, I am using this styrofoam pumpkin that I picked up from Dollar Tree last year. I removed the stem and I'm just creating a larger hole at the top. So this is the inspiration piece. I found a bark covered pumpkin at Wayfair and it was $37.99. And of course I knew I could recreate this as I love to forage birch bark. So I dove into my stash. But first I needed to give this pumpkin a coat of just some cream paint. You could use white as well. I didn't want the orange to really stand out. And I gave this pumpkin 2 coats of my paint. Once our pumpkin is all nice and dry, it is time to add the birch bark. So I'm using some thinner pieces that I had torn off of my larger pieces that I had in my stash. This is birch bark that I had foraged from the forest last year. I left it in longer strips just to make it easier to cover the pumpkin. So I'm using some hot glue to apply the pieces of birch bark onto the surface. And the hot glue did not melt my styrofoam, which was awesome. So you can also apply the glue straight onto the pumpkin and then apply your birch bark. I found that using the longer strips of birch bark also made it easier and faster to cover the piece. So if you look at our inspiration piece, you could see that they used a lot of small and textural pieces. So once I had my pumpkin covered, I started to add some small pieces that had lots of texture on them, as you can see here. And then that gave it more of the look that we were going for off of our inspiration piece. So now I'm just going to add some thinner pieces of birch bark to the bottom. You could also use a piece of felt or a fabric, use whatever you desire. I had these nice thin pieces, so that's what I chose to use. So now it's time to decorate the top. I am going to be using a larger stem piece that I had in my stash. I picked it up from a dollar store. I have some pine cones again from my stash. I'm adding a little bit of Spanish moss, and I'm using some florist wire and brown florist tape to create my tendrils. So you want to wrap the wire with the tape, and you want to twist and allow the heat from your fingers to melt the wax that's on the tape, and that allows it to hold together. You're also pulling on it gently and twisting at the same time. Once you have it covered, you'll then cut your wire into 3 pieces, and then you can use that for tendrils. I like to create tendrils by wrapping the wire around a pencil, as seen here. Make sure you leave a straight edge to apply it to your project. So I am using some Spanish moss just to cover up some of the mechanics you see there on the top of my pumpkin. And I just really like that rustic look that Spanish moss gives. And it also just adds a little bit more of a high-end look. So once that's in place, you can then add your stem, generously apply some hot glue to the bottom, and put the stem into place. Now I'm going to add the pine cones that I had. Again, that was what was in our inspiration piece. You could add anything you like. I already had these pine cones, so I really like that look. And then I'm also going to add my tendrils. Again, just use some hot glue on the stem and push them into place. Once you have your tendrils all put into place, it is ready to display on a shelf. I absolutely love how this turned out. I love the rustic high-end look that this has. Perfect for that rustic farmhouse look that I absolutely love. I had this little pumpkin plaque from a store called Dollarama. I picked it up a couple of years ago. I didn't like the glitter on it, so I'm just sanding it all off. And I am going to just recover this front side because it just wasn't talking to me anymore. You know how those old decor pieces get. I have a piece of scrapbook paper in my stash, and I really like the plaid pattern. I thought it was a nice cozy look. You could cover this with fabric as well instead. I traced around the pumpkin with a pencil on the back side of the scrapbook paper, and I also decided that, well, I'm going to just see if I could cut this out using a craft knife. I admit I actually really found this to be awkward. After the fact, I realized I should probably have just used scissors. I don't know. I just wanted to see if I could try it. So you could try it this way as well. But if you were finding it awkward, then of course, definitely use scissors. So I went ahead and just cut around it. And some of it I didn't cut all the way through. So that's why I'm like, yeah, I should have just used scissors. And I also ripped a little piece there as well. But that ripped piece, it's okay. It's going to end up getting covered up. So I've got this distress ink here, and I'm using a makeup sponge, and I'm going around the edge, and I'm just distressing the edge. I like that look. It gives more of a rustic kind of country feel to this piece of scrapbook paper. And distress ink has a bit of workable time, so you can kind of smudge it with the makeup sponge. And this is the color Frayed Burlap. So I'm going to let that ink set up, and then I am going to go ahead and glue it down to that front pumpkin sign that I have here. So I'm just going to use some tacky glue, and I'm going to just spread some out using a plastic card. I do want to get this glue right up to the edge. That way here I know I will have really good adhesion between the pumpkin and my paper. So I'm just going to smear it out with my fingers again right up to the edge, and I'll put my paper into place and smooth it out. So one thing I do like to do is I actually like to flip my pieces upside down and put some weight on them, and then they end up drying really nice and flat. So that's what I'm doing right here. It's all set up. Now I've decided I'm going to use this scrap piece of burlap that I had, and I'm just going to cut it down to size, and that's what I'm going to use on the stem. So as you can see, you can't even see that little rip part that I had ripped off. So I'm using some tacky glue. I'm just being careful how much I use though. I didn't want to apply too much of the glue because it does seep through, and I didn't want that. So I put that into place, and then you can just trim it down to size if you kind of want that rustic country look, and just fray the edges. I had this little raffia bow in my stash left over from a previous project. I just added that, and that's it. It was such a simple project. You could put some words on the front if you like, but I really like the simplicity and coziness of how this turned out. So we all love these Dollar Tree pumpkins, and I'm just taking the stem out as well as the tag, and I am going to cut a hole into the top. So I have this bottle, and I'm going to place it in the hole, and that will be my holder as I paint the pumpkin with this chalk paint. I love this chalk paint. It's my favorite color. And I will leave the name of it down in my description box. So as you can see, the handle makes it easier to coat this pumpkin, and I do give the pumpkin 2 coats of the chalk paint. So I have this piece of cheesecloth from my stash that I had coffee stained quite a long time ago, and I am going to place the pumpkin in the middle of the cheesecloth and just lift the sides and tuck it into the hole. To coffee stain, it is really easy. You just need good strong coffee, soak your cheesecloth, remove the excess, and lay out to dry. Next, I have this paper covered wire from Dollarama. You could also use some floral wire and wrap it in florist tape. And now I'm taking that wire and wrapping it around a pencil to create some tendrils. Okay, so now that that's done, I am adding this wood stem from Dollar Tree or from your yard, and place that in the middle, and then I tuck my tendrils inside around the twig as well. You could glue all your pieces into the place. That is optional. I chose not to, so I can reuse these pumpkins at a later date. So I have this really old aged paper, and I decided to cut some leaves out of it. I cut 3 for my project. Now I'm taking the leaves, and I am going to just add a little dab of glue and glue them into place, and then I'll just shape them a little bit. If you are new, I want to say welcome, and I'd love for you to join my community by tapping on the subscribe button as well as the bell to keep up to date with everything I have to share. So I already showed you one way to use some doilies for some pumpkins, but this is another way. Use one of those foam pumpkins, and you can see I already hollowed out the top, and then wrap the entire pumpkin with the doily, tucking those edges inside just like you see me doing right here, and you've got a beautiful pumpkin. Doesn't that look so beautiful? So I've got my stem here. I'm just going to shove that in the middle, and I've got some white covered wire here this time around, and I'm going to tuck those little tendrils inside next to the stem. And I haven't used any hot glue to put all this together so far. You could if you wanted to, but again, like I mentioned before, I like to be able to reuse these little pieces if I can. So I'm adding some leaves this time, but you can see I'm putting a bit of hot glue on, and then I'm adhering the stems to the tendrils. The glue is not touching the doilies at all. So again, I can take this apart and reuse it. But if you don't care if the glue gets on the doily or not, then by all means, please just use some hot glue to attach it all together. I think these are such unique pumpkins. They look so beautiful on display. Let me know what you think of these. I have so many more fall DIY ideas for you to check out in this video right here. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. Let me know your favorite project of the day was, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.